In 1996, a suspicious house fire destroyed the home of a Seattle, Washington policeman. In a bizarre twist, an ex-convict confessed to setting the fire, then mysteriously disappeared. When investigators looked carefully at the written confession, they discovered clues of a more serious crime than arson. They found evidence of murder. Sergeant Matt Bachmeier was a 25-year veteran of the King County Sheriff's Department, a man well-liked and respected by his peers.
This guy was a police hero. You know, he had been involved in several different types of shootouts or real interesting type of events and had survived them.
On July 9th, 1996, at 1:30 in the morning, a fire broke out in Sergeant Bachmeier's suburban home. Bachmeier was at a local bowling alley when the fire broke out. By the time the fire was extinguished, the home was almost completely destroyed. The origin of the fire appeared suspicious, and dogs specially trained to recognize flammable liquids or accelerants were sent to sniff through the rubble. The dogs identified 5 different areas where accelerants were used to set this fire. One was in the basement, a second in the dining room. There were 2 separate areas in the attic, and the 5th was in the garage. In arson terms, this is called a layering fire. On the outside wall of Sergeant Bachmeier's garage were spray-painted messages critical of police. One said, "Rios lives." Guadalupe Rios was a man Sergeant Bachmeier had shot and killed 8 years earlier in the line of duty. Bachmeier told colleagues that he had received threats from Rios's friends and relatives, but until now, they had only been threats. Captain Dave Marin was Sergeant Bachmeier's supervisor.
We were concerned anytime a fellow officer's home is arson, that's a traumatic event for them. And I talked to him about what he might need as a way of help and support and time off to recover from that.
While the arson investigation continued, Sergeant Bachmeier himself uncovered some important information about the fire. It happened when he was called to break up a neighborhood fight.
Is anybody hurt?
Yeah.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm all right.
Can anybody here say what happened?
One of the men in that fight was Brad Wren, who had a history of mental problems and had some prior brushes with the law.
Thank you. What happened?
Well, I can start off by telling you 2 weeks ago he was shot in the leg. And now tonight he got in a fight with his roommate's brother.
You doing okay? Is that leg all right?
It's certainly killing me, but I guess it's going to be all right.
All right, let's get down to the police station. You take your statement there.
Sergeant Bachmeier asked Wren to come to the police station so that he could take his statement. According to Sergeant Bachmeier, during questioning, Wren asked Bachmeier if he was the cop whose home was destroyed by the recent fire.
Are you the cop that had his house burned down?
Yeah, why?
When Bachmeier said yes, Wren allegedly told Bachmeier that he knew the identity of the arsonist.
It's a drug dealer I met in the bar. Pepe Hernandez.
Pepe Hernandez told Wren that a local cop had stolen some drugs and money from him during a recent drug bust.
Hey man, this cop busted me the other day.
Yeah?
He stole my dope and my stash of money.
So what are you gonna do?
I know where he lives, and I want to go get my stuff back. You know, I'll give you $500 if you come and help me.
The cop Hernandez was talking about was none other than Sergeant Bachmeier.
So I said, okay.
Then what happened?
We broke in your house. Peppy tore the house up. We couldn't find the drugs or the money. So Peppy started stealing things. Paintings and statues. And I heard him say he was gonna burn your house down. And then he just did it.
Where is he now?
If you think I'm gonna help you find him, you're crazy. He'll kill me. When I left, he was pissed, and I'm glad he's gone.
Sergeant Bachmeier transcribed Wren's entire statement, had Wren sign it, then released him from custody. But Bachmeier had a dilemma. The confession implicated him in the theft of drugs and money. So he decided not to turn it over to his superiors, at least not yet. Brad Wren, the man who allegedly confessed to taking part in the arson of Sergeant Matt Bachmeier's home, had a history of mental problems. It all started when Brad Wren was in the Air Force. He was in a severe motorcycle accident and barely escaped with his life.
He had massive brain injuries. They didn't know if he went in a coma. They didn't know what to tell us or anything till he come out of the coma.
Wren eventually recovered, but he was never the same after the accident. His personality changed. He was more aggressive, and for the first time in his life, got into trouble with the law. Shortly after the accident, he was convicted of a sex-related offense and spent 3 months in prison. More recently, Wren was in a violent argument with his roommate, Emmett Marcel, who shot him in the leg, shattering his tibia.
His roommate had a mental problem too, and if he didn't take his medication, why, then he was just more or less wacky, you know. And evidently he'd been off his medication for a while, and him and Brad got into it.
They were doing some kind of siding or roofing or something for a friend. And Brad hit Emmett's finger with the hammer. And that's what Emmett said he shot him for.
Unaware of Brad Wren's alleged confession, arson investigator Becky Gibbs was assigned to investigate the arson fire of Sergeant Bachmeier's home. She saw evidence that was inconsistent with a fire set for revenge.
And typically, if somebody's going to set a fire for revenge, they may go to some trouble to set a fire, but this particular way of setting a fire takes some time.
The debris from the fire was analyzed using gas chromatography, which found traces of gasoline in the debris. There was also evidence that road flares were used to ignite the gasoline. Most fires set for revenge do not use time-delay devices. The flares would have given Sergeant Bachmeier enough time to drive to the bowling alley to establish his alibi before the gasoline containers exploded. Investigators were also suspicious because Bachmeier's artwork, porcelain collection, and bowling trophies were found undamaged in his backyard shed after the fire. Sergeant Bachmeier became the prime suspect. He adamantly denied any involvement, but when asked to take a lie detector test, he refused. Under increasing scrutiny, Sergeant Bachmeier had no choice but to produce Brad Wren's alleged confession, even though it implicated Bachmeier in stealing from a reputed drug dealer. When police tried to interview Brad Wren to corroborate his confession, they discovered he was missing.
There wasn't any of his clothes, none of his shoes, nothing left in the house.
Wren's roommate, Emmett Marcel, who had shot Wren in the leg just a few weeks earlier, said he knew nothing about Wren's disappearance.
I knew Brad was dead. I knew it. I don't know how I knew it, but I knew my son was dead. We would have heard from him. He would have never went off and left his dogs with nobody taking care of them. He would have never he would have just never left them like that.
Detective Denny Gula asked Matt Bachmeier if he knew anything about Wren's disappearance, since Bachmeier was the last known person to see Wren alive.
He starts laughing. He goes, well, if you find him dead with my business card nailed to his forehead, you'll know who to come talk to. And he kind of laughs it off kind of jokingly. And, you know, I wrote that down when he says it because I'm going, that's kind of bizarre.
Police could find no arrest record for anyone by the name of Pepe Hernandez, and police officials say Bachmeier's handling of Brad Wren's interrogation was improper.
When you're taking a confession to a Class A felony, and a crime for which you yourself are under suspicion, as Sergeant Bachmeier was, and at the very least, you're a victim of the very same crime, it would be highly, highly unusual for a experienced police sergeant of 25 years to take a statement like that alone from a suspect. And then certainly to release him immediately afterwards would be extremely, extremely rare.
Although Brad Wren's family identified the signature on the bottom of the alleged confession as Brad's, forensic document examiners weren't entirely convinced. In Seattle, Washington, police were conducting two simultaneous investigations. One into the fire that destroyed Police Sergeant Matt Bachmeier's home. The other, a search for the whereabouts of Brad Wren. They were connected, since Brad Wren was last seen alive in the back seat of Sergeant Bachmeier's patrol car.
That was the last sighting we had, and in police investigations, the last person seen with someone who's alive is certainly going to attract your interest.
The 4.5-page statement in which Brad Wren allegedly admitted to taking part in the arson of Sergeant Bachmeier's home was written by Bachmeier, then signed by Wren, which is standard procedure. Brad Wren had signed the first 4 pages of the confession, but for some unexplained reason did not sign the last page.
In our department, that's not normal. That's not a normal procedure. We would write the whole statement, and the very last page would have that on it.
The confession was subjected to a process known as video spectrography. To the naked eye, the ink in Wren's confession all looked the same. But the video spectrography told a different story. Under various infrared light sources, scientists could see that the confession was written with 3 different inks. All of Wren's signatures and his initials were written in a black ink with high luminescence. The entire first page and the top of the second used a gray-black ink with medium luminescence. From then on, a third ink was used, a black ink that shows no reaction to the infrared light. And there were other discrepancies. Wren's occupation was listed as truck driver, which was incorrect, as was other vital information.
James Wren's birth date was different. On the second page, it's listed as 1971, and then on the third and fourth page, it's 1961, and then the fifth page doesn't even have a birth date.
In the confession, Bachmeier incorrectly wrote the contraction for UR as YOUR. The same mistake found in the threatening message on Sergeant Bachmeier's garage after the fire. Next, scientists checked Bachmeier's patrol car and found something unusual.
As they go through the back seat of Bachmeier's patrol car, they find just very faint traces of blood. And initially they thought, well, it's a police car. It's not going to be unusual to have faint traces of blood in the back seat of a police car. They open up the seat and they find in the stitching several bloodstain patterns on the backside of the seat cover that had soaked through the stitching.
Using a sample of blood from Brad Wren's parents, a reverse paternity DNA test was made. It proved conclusively that the blood from the back seat of the patrol car was that of Brad Wren.
Can anybody here tell me what happened?
Bachmeier said the blood was from Wren's bloody nose that occurred in the fight Bachmeier was called to break up. Investigators decided to test this hypothesis to see if the size of the bloodstain was consistent with a nosebleed. Forensic scientists used identical rear seats from other patrol cars to conduct their test. Using head sculptures with wigs and weights to simulate a human head, investigators poured different amounts of blood onto the seat cushions. It took 2 quarts of blood to produce a stain the size found in Bachmeier's patrol car. A loss of 2 quarts of blood would be life-threatening. Police also found Brad Wren's blood on a pair of Sergeant Bachmeier's work shoes. Investigators now believed that Brad Wren died in the back seat of Sergeant Bachmeier's patrol car. But where was Brad Wren's body? 7 months after Brad Wren's disappearance, hikers in a restricted area of Cougar Mountain Park outside of Seattle found some bones and what appeared to be a human skull. The bones had been scattered by animals. Fragments were found over a quarter-mile away. Only 20% of the skeleton was recovered, but the size and shape of the cranium told forensic anthropologists that the victim was male and that the condition of the bones indicated they had been in the park less than a year. They also found a steel rod in the lower leg bone, a surgical repair identical to one performed on Brad Wren. And near some of the bones in the park, searchers found a red, white, and blue leg cast. Witnesses said Brad Wren was wearing an identical leg cast when he left with Sergeant Bachmeier in his patrol car. The marrow in one of the bones was tested for DNA, and the results confirmed what investigators already suspected. The bone was that of Brad Wren. The DNA from the bone marrow also matched the blood in Sergeant Bachmeier's car.
First thing I did, start bawling. Cried my heart out. But I was glad in a lot of ways they found him. It was hell, not knowing where he was at.
Sergeant Bachmeier's girlfriend told investigators that Bachmeier had a key to the restricted area of Cougar Mountain Park where the body was discovered. The only remaining question for investigators was the motive.
The story is so convoluted and so sort of pathetically obvious in its fabrication that it almost defies belief. I mean, I think it would be rejected as a plot for a novel or a script for a movie because it just seems so absurd and outlandish and unnecessarily sort of complex and contradictory.
Matt Bachmeier was an avid bowler, and his dream was to compete on the Professional Bowlers Tour. Prosecutors believe Bachmeier set fire to his own home using the time delay device, giving him time to get to the bowling alley to establish his alibi. Bachmeier may have planned to use the insurance money from the fire to finance his entry onto the Pro Bowlers Tour. But removing his bowling trophies and artwork from the home before the fire was a classic arson mistake. When Bachmeier learned he was a suspect in the arson, he looked for a scapegoat. Brad Wren was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there is no evidence he ever made it to police headquarters for questioning. Somewhere along the way, Bachmeier stopped his car and forced or coerced Wren into signing some blank police reports.
I'm not going to bother taking you down to the station. I'll just write the report from what you've already told me. There'll be no charges. Sign a couple of these forms for me, would you?
Is this something you normally do?
Yeah. It's fine. Hey, do me a favor. In case your statement goes on too long, could you sign a few more extra copies for me?
Yeah, sure.
Then, Bachmeier murdered him. Wren's blood seeped into the rear seat cushions as Bachmeier made the 30-minute drive to Cougar Mountain Park to dump the body. Sometime later, Bachmeier composed the phony confession, which forensic technology revealed as bogus.
I've never been so mad at somebody in my whole life. There was a time or two there that I just wanted to get a hold of him so bad. I think I could have ripped him limb by limb. I was just furious with that man.
I don't think he's much of a man. I think the man must have a mental problem or something. I don't know. I can't feature a police officer 25 years or so doing something like this without having some kind of a problem. What was he going to gain out of it, you know? I don't know.
He started fabricating stories to various people that were contradictory, that evolved, and all of which were essentially implausible and as I said, self-contradictory. And I think he got desperate, and he compounded a series of bad decisions with a homicide.
Sergeant Matt Bachmeier was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Seattle prosecutors say it was one of the most bizarre murder cases they had ever encountered.
I can't pretend to tell you what sort of a person gets drawn into a web of his own making to the extent that he's willing to take a human life. All I can say is that we see this happen, and we rarely see it happen with a law enforcement officer with 25 years of service. But most murders are fundamentally inexplicable, unreasonable, irrational events.
When you look at the inconsistency of his statements and just how incredible they are, you can't understand how somebody with 25 years of interrogating offenders, with somebody who's out on the street every day and listens to these lame explanations from people that he arrests, could actually believe people would believe this. I mean, I have no idea, because they were just stupid. He told lie after lie after lie that were ridiculous. And I can't imagine how anybody would have thought they would be believed.
I think stupid would apply, but I think the thing that comes to mind is just really underestimated the people that worked around him, that he got thinking that he was smarter than everybody else, better than everybody else, and that he could do this.
One of our members was talking not too long ago about someone writing a book about this, and they said, I don't think anybody will write a book about this, because when you tell the story, it's not believable. But it is interesting, and so I think this still, for quite some time to come, will be with our department, unfortunately.
Maybe they won't like serving time with a cop. Maybe justice will be served then. And I told him that the day they sentenced him. I told him no matter where he went, no matter where they sent him, sooner or later somebody's gonna find out he was a cop. And then I think justice will be served.